guys, and welcome back to my channel for another video in my history series, where today I want to discuss a moment in history for which the accepted narrative is completely wrong. A lot of you have probably heard of the story of the Mcdonald's lawsuit from back in the 90s, how a woman sued McDonald's because her coffee was too hot, a frivolous lawsuit, a woman looking to make money quick. But it turns out that was just a very smart move on behalf of the McDonald's PR team. They pushed a completely false narrative out into the media and made this woman a laughingstock after she was left injured for life. And as you'll come to find, this story goes a lot deeper than even that. It changed the face of the American justice system. The accepted public narrative of the story goes as following. A woman ordered a coffee, she was drinking it whilst driving, and she spilled it on herself. She then sued McDonald's for millions just because she could. Suffice to say, that's not what actually happened. As always, this video is sponsored by Magellan TV, who I have a long-standing sponsorship with. I couldn't do what I do here on the internet without them. They're a streaming service dedicated purely to documentaries, and each month I like to make a couple of recommendations of documentaries I think you should watch, starting this week with Great Bank Heists. I was so excited when I saw this one on Magellan because I've actually been really into learning about famous bank heists at the moment, and will probably make a bank heist video soon at some point, but this documentary examines three of the most incredible and ingenious robberies of all time. It is just crazy to me how some people are brave enough to plan an entire bank heist and then actually go through with it. Like, even the psychology behind it is crazy to me, and this documentary is so well done. And the next one is even darker, with Ku Klux Klan: An American Story. This is a 2-episode series, and as you would expect from the title, it's very heavy but also very important viewing. Being from the UK, I've obviously heard of the KKK, I know what they're about, but I've never really delved into learning about the oldest terrorist group in the United States. It is horrifying that in the 150 years since its conception, the KKK has never disappeared for even a moment. Some decades it's stronger, some it's weaker, but it's always full of hatred. It's just the worst of society. I must admit, this documentary shocked me. I thought I knew how bad it all was, but geez, this hatred runs deep. Magellan TV have everything from true crime, science, history, nature, and everything in between, with new programmes added weekly that can be watched anywhere on your TV, laptop and mobile. It's compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Google Play and iOS, and most of the programmes are available in 4K if you like that quality. If you enjoy my channel, then honestly I cannot stress enough how much you will enjoy Magellan TV. And I'm really happy to announce that my viewers can now take advantage of an exclusive offer, 30% off of an annual membership. That's an entire year of a catalogue of over 3,000 documentaries for less than £3.50 a month. All you have to do is click on the link in the description box down below to claim your discounted annual membership today. And that does include those of you who are already signed up to Magellan TV. You just have to let your subscription lapse, and then you can claim this amazing offer for yourself. It was the 27th of February 1992 when a 79-year-old woman called Stella Liebeck from Albuquerque, New Mexico, visited a local McDonald's with her nephew after they'd just dropped her son at the airport. They went through the drive-thru of McDonald's located at 5001 Gibson Boulevard Southeast and ordered a 29-cent cup of coffee for Stella and food for her nephew. Despite public opinion of this case being that Stella spilt hot coffee over herself while she was driving, that she was completely irresponsible, that of course isn't what happened at all. Stella's nephew was actually driving, and after receiving their order he pulled into a parking space to sort himself out and the food out. It seems he did intend to eat his food on their journey, but they just had to organise it all first. But they never even got that far. As there were no cup holders in her nephew's car, Stella put the cup of coffee between her legs and took the lid off in order to put cream and sugar in her coffee. Only as she did so, she spilt the drink all over her legs. She was wearing cotton sweatpants at the time, which just absorbed the coffee and held it against her skin, scalding it in just 3 seconds. Stella knew it was serious as soon as it happened. I can't imagine the pain, and she was rushed off to hospital. She was found to have suffered third-degree burns to 6% of her body, including her inner thighs, buttocks and genitals, and then lesser burns over 16% of her body. Third-degree burns are full-thickness burns that destroy 2 full layers of your skin, going through the dermis to the deeper tissues. These are serious burns, and Stella had these all over her thighs. She had to stay in hospital for 8 days where she required skin grafts to treat the injuries. During this time, she lost 20% of her total body weight and was just generally in a really bad way. Although Stella was a 79-year-old woman at the time of the accident, she was pretty fit and healthy. She was in a good way. According to her daughter Judy, she even worked full-time up until a week before the accident. I'm not sure if Stella just coincidentally retired the week before the accident, or if Judy was just saying, like, before the accident she worked. Judy actually took part in an HBO documentary from 2011 called Hot Coffee about this incident and the aftermath of it. You can easily find this documentary for free here on YouTube, and I would highly recommend watching it. I got a lot of my information for this video from that documentary. Even after she left hospital, Stella was left with permanent disfigurement and she was partially disabled for 2 years. And not only that, but she was also left with the stress of her medical bill, which was up to $10,000 at that point, and was estimated to be added to in the future. Judy had to stop working to care for Stella at home for 3 weeks, losing approximately $5,000 worth of income. The family never intended to sue McDonald's, but they did want compensation for the money they'd lost. So they wrote to McDonald's asking for $20,000 to cover actual and anticipated expenses. This wasn't insane amounts of money considering it was just enough to make up for what had been lost. They also requested that the particular franchise they had bought this coffee from got their machine fixed, because the machine was clearly broken if it was producing coffee as hot as this was. In response, McDonald's offered a measly $800 in compensation. So, with no other choice, Stella Liebeck hired a lawyer called Reed Morgan and filed a lawsuit. She didn't want to do this particularly, but she felt she had no other choice. Liebeck and Morgan offered to settle for $90,000, which McDonald's refused. So they then offered to settle for $300,000, with the mediator suggesting $225,000 just before the trial, but McDonald's refused this once again. So the case was going to have to go to a proper trial. Now, Stella acknowledged that the spill itself was her fault. She wasn't blaming McDonald's for her spilling the coffee. What she was blaming them for was the fact that the coffee was ridiculously hot. She accused them of gross negligence for selling coffee that was unreasonably dangerous and defectively manufactured. At home, most people make their coffee between 135 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit. That's between 57 and 65 degrees Celsius for those of us who aren't in the UK. Whilst most restaurants and fast food places tend to go a bit hotter than people do at home, so up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, 71 Celsius. This gives workers a bit of leeway. People don't tend to drink their drinks in a restaurant as fast as they would at home, and if it's a fast food drive-through, people usually wait until they're at their destination to drink, so it needs to be a little bit hotter. At this temperature though, you can get third-degree burns in 20 seconds, but that does give you time to get out of your clothes or wipe the coffee away before it causes any serious damage. At the time of this accident, this McDonald's franchise and so many others were serving their coffee at dangerously hot temperatures, as was specified in the operations manual given to each franchise. This was 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, 82 to 87 degrees Celsius. That's not far off boiling point and significantly higher than the average serving temperatures. If a coffee that hot touches your skin, it's going to burn, and it's going to burn badly within just 3 to 7 seconds. You can't even begin to drink your drink at that temperature, it would literally burn your insides. McDonald's later claimed to do this because it made their coffee taste better and that their customers wanted hot drinks to have with them on the go. If you're grabbing a drive-through coffee on a long journey, the last thing you want is it getting cold 20 minutes in. But at what cost? Not to interject here with too much of a personal story, but I used to work as a barista serving coffee, and the amount of people that would ask for extra hot drinks just astounded me. Our hot water machine dispensed water at a certain temperature which we couldn't change, and we were trained to only heat milk up to a certain temperature because otherwise it would burn, for one, and for two, it was dangerous. I can't even tell you the amount of times I burned myself on hot drinks in that job, and those drinks were nowhere near as hot as what McDonald's was serving back in the 90s. But people still insisted to me that they wanted them hotter and hotter, and then they'd scoff at me when I'd say it was a health and safety risk. I'm not condoning McDonald's actions here in any way, but, supply and demand. People do want burning hot drinks. The trial took place from August 8th to the 17th, 1994, over 2 years since the original incident. It was found at trial that not only did McDonald's serve their coffees at insanely hot temperatures, but their own records show they'd also received 700 complaints before about hot coffee and burns, about which they just didn't seem to care. They knew that this was a long-standing issue, but they decided to ignore it. McDonald's, and I do want to make it clear that I'm talking about the entire McDonald's corporation here and not just the specific franchise, argued that people liked their coffee the way they sold it. They sold $1.35 million worth of coffee every single day. Why would they change their formula? However, in a previous case where McDonald's had actually settled with another burn victim, it had promised to test whether decreasing the temperature to a safer level would have affected their sales. They never did this testing. McDonald's had settled out of court with so many other burn cases, so why they refused to do so with Stella eludes me. Perhaps they thought they'd win in court against a 79-year-old woman. They were a huge corporation worth billions, and they could win against one pensioner. Spoiler alert, they could not. Other evidence the jury heard at trial was from an expert on burns, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Burn Care and Rehabilitation, who said that the risk of harm here was unacceptable. McDonald's admitted that they'd known about the risk of serious burns for more than 10 years, as had been brought to their attention through numerous other complaints. Their quality assurance manager also testified that at the temperature at which the coffee was poured into the styrofoam cups, it was not fit for consumption due to the risk of burns. And they admitted that the consumers were unaware of the extent of the risk of serious burns from spilled coffee. There was no really warning on the cup. They made no effort to warn customers of the nature and extent of this risk. Now, you would expect that it would probably burn if you spilled a hot drink on yourself, but the temperature of these particular drinks wouldn't just cause surface burns as we've covered. They would cause serious, deep burns. One juror later said to the Wall Street Journal that the company just didn't seem to be taking the injuries seriously. McDonald's said in court that 700 injury cases out of the millions of cups of coffee they sold every single day was nothing. But if you were to try and get all of these 700 people in one place, that's a lot of people. They saw each complaint as just that, a complaint and not a person. After hearing all of the evidence, the jury placed 20% of the fault with Stella for spilling the coffee in the first place, but the remaining 80% of the fault was that of McDonald's. Stella was awarded $200,000 in compensation for her injuries, less than 20% for her portion of the blame, so total $160,000. But that wasn't all. They also awarded her $2.7 million in punitive damages, which is an amount that she definitely did not ask for. The definition of punitive damages reads, damages exceeding simple compensation and awarded to punish the defendant. Basically, the jury felt like McDonald's needed to be punished, especially as they'd broken earlier promises that they'd made to do market testing. They decided that the equivalent of just 2 days worth of coffee sales would be enough here, so $2.7 million. However, after trial, the judge made the decision to reduce the punitive damages award to $480,000, despite saying that McDonald's had engaged in unwillful, wanton and reckless behaviour. All of this meant that Stella should have been walking away from court with $640,000 total. Only, of course, McDonald's appealed this and the case was actually eventually settled for a still undisclosed amount. I did do some searching on the internet, and all I could find is that the amount was probably under $600,000, maybe even under $500,000, which is significantly less than $2.7 million, but significantly more than the $20,000 that Stella had originally requested. But how about her original request that they stopped heating up their coffee to such high temperatures? I couldn't really find any clear answer as to what exactly McDonald's did about this. The HBO documentary Hot Coffee said that the McDonald's holding temperature for coffee now sits at around 10 degrees lower, although that was as of the documentary being made in 2011, and I'm not sure how long it took for them to implement that change. A lot of sources also say that McDonald's improved their coffee cups in response to a very stiff cardboard cup instead of just changing the coffee temperature. The story should have ended there, with Stella getting enough compensation to cover her medical bills and a bit extra, and McDonald's making a change. Except, as we all probably know, it did not. The media got a hold of this story, and so did big business. Now, this is a point in the story where things start to get a bit confusing and lore-y and possibly even boring, but bear with me, I'm going to do my best to make this as riveting as possible. To this day, this whole case is considered to be a prime example of a frivolous lawsuit, just wasting taxpayers' money. But clearly that's not the case because of everything I've just told you. We can all probably agree by this point that Stella Liebeck deserved the compensation that she got. She was undeniably seriously injured, and she only wanted McDonald's to cover her medical bills, and they refused. They brought this lawsuit on themselves. As Stella's daughter-in-law later told Reader's Digest, "I've heard people say she was asking for $30 million or something equally ridiculous. Basically, Stella told McDonald's, I want you to cover what Medicare doesn't cover, and I want you to get a better lid on that coffee because I don't want this to happen to another person." That's what she was asking for. Stella didn't ask for anything that happened to her in the media, and McDonald's could have easily avoided this PR nightmare if they just settled in the first place. And when it did become a PR nightmare for McDonald's, which it easily could have come, they were going to spin it in any way they could so they were the good guys in the eyes of the public. The media coverage of this case was extremely biased on the side of McDonald's. This story was taken completely out of context, and Stella and the 12 jurors in this case became somewhat of a laughingstock across the United States. But this all went a hell of a lot deeper than just Stella and the McDonald's case, because soon big corporations realised that they could use this story to their advantage. Painting McDonald's as the victim here was a great way for big businesses to create a public narrative, a public outrage about frivolous lawsuits. Stupid, greedy people claiming money off businesses just because they can, because the American law is too soft and the justice system just isn't up to standard. The truth is, out of all of the branches of American law, the civil justice system was probably one of the most honest at this time. That's not to say it was perfect by any means, but there were plenty of checks and balances in place to ensure that the law was upheld and everything was fair. There are many systems in place to weed out what truly would be frivolous lawsuits, ones that don't have any merit to them. The majority of lawsuits that would be considered as frivolous would never ever have their day in court. But the narrative pushed to the public about the McDonald's case was that there weren't these systems in place, that frivolous lawsuits were common and jury verdicts were apparently wrong a lot of the time, which just wasn't the case. But why was this? Why would big business benefit from this kind of narrative? The answer to that is tort reform. It took me a while to get the definition of this straight in my head, but a tort is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as a wrongful act or infringement of right leading to legal liability. So essentially, a tort is a harm done to someone else, a breach of someone else's civil rights that directly results in injury to a person or damage to a person's property. A tort case is generally dealt with in civil court, not criminal court. And whilst it's not always the case, torts are most often unintentional, often caused by negligence, like accidentally hitting someone with your car and injuring them, or slip and fall accidents in the workplace. You wouldn't go to a criminal court for a fall in your workplace. It doesn't affect society as a whole. But when that one person who had the fall wants compensation from their business, that's a tort. Tort reform is where it gets even more complicated. Tort reform refers to a change in the civil justice system that reduces the ability of victims of torts to file lawsuits, so make it more difficult to obtain a jury trial in civil action, and place limits on the amount of money people can recover in a lawsuit, essentially putting a cap on how much money can be given to the plaintiff. So essentially, tort reform is just changing what exactly is a tort and how far that can go in court. Which, as you can imagine, is fantastic for businesses, not so great for the public. Obviously, as the definition of tort is so wide, it doesn't just involve one single law. Tort reform would require an expansive change of the entire legal system, a part of the legal system which is already incredibly widely litigated. Tort reform doesn't really benefit the American public in any way, only businesses. So the public had to be convinced that tort reform was a good idea. Enter the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. By spinning this story so out of context, by making it seem like the American civil system is failing with out-of-control jury verdicts and ridiculous lawsuits, and it's you as the taxpayer that's paying for this broken system, you can quite easily convince people for tort reform. It started with just the McDonald's PR team trying to spin something that was very, very bad for them into something not so bad. But once the media and business caught on to this, they realised they could use it to their advantage. And of course the media is so complicit here because who owns the media? Corporate America. It's very easy to see where businesses wanted tort reform. Many businesses live in fear of being sued and having to pay out huge sums of money could bankrupt them, put them out of business entirely. But tort reform is not in the best interest of your average American. It stops you from fighting for your rights. Calls for tort reform actually did pass the Senate years ago, before being vetoed by President Clinton at the time. So instead, the people calling for the reforms went straight to their state legislators instead, meaning that a lot of individual states started to reform. The way a lot of these companies fought for tort reform was by making the effort seem community-driven, by setting up seemingly community action groups, just regular people looking out for the rights of regular people. But it wasn't regular people at the core of this. It was these huge multi-million-dollar companies funded entirely by corporate America setting up these little websites and putting out leaflets convincing the regular person they're also regular people. They're not. He was the governor of Texas before becoming president, and one of his first priorities as governor was tort reform, something which continued into his presidency. Despite him claiming that there were junk lawsuits clogging up our courts and a litigation explosion, there just simply wasn't. People weren't suing at that point any more than they were before. Bush claimed that tort reform in Texas would save consumers billions of dollars. But it didn't. Consumers were actually the ones who missed out. And in a lot of states which enacted tort reform, insurance premiums actually spiked. Now I must admit, American people have a huge stereotype as being sue happy, suing companies left, right and centre for seemingly no reason. But why is that? And I don't think it's entirely on the back of this false narrative after the McDonald's case, although that definitely does lend itself to the reputation. When I uploaded my video a few months ago about how I had chronic appendicitis for 5 years, I was blown away at the amount of American people I had in my comments telling me to sue the NHS for not diagnosing me right away. It shocked me because that's not something that ever would have crossed my mind in a million years. The NHS did nothing wrong, and chronic appendicitis is incredibly hard to diagnose, and we all, me included, thought it was digestive issues. No biggie. Looking at the stats, it does seem that people in the USA do sue more than people in the UK, but the gap there isn't as large as you would expect, and a lot of lawsuits are down to medical malpractice in the USA. Here in the UK, we have the NHS, free healthcare at the point of use. If, God forbid, something goes wrong, you're not out of pocket as well as sick. But in the USA, if something goes wrong and you don't have insurance or not good enough insurance, and you're then stuck with medical bills coming out of your ears for both the original issue and the after effects of any malpractice, it makes sense why you'd want to sue. It seems that the suing culture stereotype that the USA has is both the result of baseless rumour on the back of this McDonald's case, which was pushed by big business within the USA itself, and systems that require people to sue if they don't want to bankrupt themselves. It goes deeper than that, I'm sure, so don't come for me. I'm just sort of pondering the question here. But actually, whilst we're talking about medical malpractice, that brings me to a great example of how tort reform was designed to screw over the general public. In the Hot Coffee documentary, they show an example of this in the form of a woman who is pregnant with identical twins. There was an issue with the twins in which one of them wasn't receiving any nutrients, and it was missed by her doctor on multiple occasions. It was something easy to spot that was missed. One of the babies was born with severe disabilities, and they required $6 million to cover their son's medical expenses before and after his birth. Thanks to caps put in place in their state because of tort reform, they had limits on how much they could get, and they didn't get anywhere near that amount. If I remember correctly from the documentary, they received just over $100,000, which wasn't enough to cover anything. I want to say this was all a case of the butterfly effect, but I don't think that so much. Even if Stella Liebeck hadn't spilt the coffee on herself that morning, I think corporate America would have still found some way to push the tort reform agenda. But the McDonald's case provided the perfect platform. It was very easy for the McDonald's PR team to spin this story so they were the good guys here, and from there the story just got out of control. Stella was a 79-year-old woman in her 80s by the time the trial came around and all the media coverage took off. All she wanted was her medical bills covered, but instead she was embarrassed and ridiculed all across America. Even to this day, if you ask somebody about the McDonald's case, they will probably say that it was all ridiculous, it was a frivolous lawsuit. But we need to change that narrative. Undeniably, there are many problems within the American law system, as there is with the UK law system and every law system. But the McDonald's case was not one of them. This case was justified. Stella died in 2004, aged 91, of an illness unrelated to the coffee incident. But she never regained the strength that she had before. She was never the same again. Suffering such terrible burns would affect somebody even in the prime of their life, let alone a pensioner. McDonald's did eventually lower the temperature of their coffees, but it was too little too late. Not only did Stella get injured, but her reputation suffered as well. They did not need to put her through what they did. So there you go, that is the story of how a 79-year-old woman spilling hot coffee on herself changed the sort of civil court landscape in America. A bit of hot coffee was enough to affect American people across the country, enough to stop them getting their medical bills paid for getting justice in cases where they should have got justice because of tort reform. And it was not the fault of Stella. It was not her fault at all. She had every single right to go and sue McDonald's because they literally burned her skin off and caused her a lot of pain and a lot of damage. At the end of this day, this all comes down to greed and money, as so much in this world does. Big businesses who already have enough money to go around, not wanting to pay for their malpractice and putting people in danger, they just didn't care. Hopefully I've taught you something this week and debunked some thoughts that you might have had. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.